Afternoon, everyone. You may remember me from earlier. I'm back. So we're going to be together for about the next hour talking about the future of life. And just to kick it off, we've got an amazing speaker. We've got Gigi Levy-Weiss from NFX, where he's the managing partner of that seed fund based in San Francisco. And he's going to tell us about his vision of the future of life. So Gigi, welcome.
So guys, thanks for hanging out till now, and I'm going to assume that part of you know something about what I'm going to talk about, and part of you know nothing, so it's going to be something in the middle. And if you really understand a lot, then I'm sorry, and I'll try to still make it interesting. So NFX is a seed fund in Silicon Valley. We run like $500 million, and we actually are software people rather than biology people, but we found ourselves in biology, and I'll explain in a second why. And what I want to talk about today is basically network effects in biological systems, or in other words, how do we think you can build the world's largest biological companies in the future, and why we think now is the right time. And NFX, for those that don't know, stands for network effect, which is our core thesis. And so what's happening in the world, and what is computational biology? As I said, some of you probably know that, but it's basically the engineering of biological systems so that you create a new system or modify an existing one. And basically what's happened is that if biology used to be a standalone thing, and data and computation and software used to be a standalone thing, that's all connecting now, which is the reason why somebody like me that founded 8 software companies, but had nothing to do with biology, can actually stand and talk about that now. And it's sometimes also called synthetic biology because it's not just about the computation, it's also about changing things, re-engineering them. And in a second we'll see what that means. And so this is probably the world's biggest new frontier. It's a new frontier because when we think about synthetic biology, what we think about mostly is about pharma, right? They're a big field with billions of dollars, trillions of dollars, but it's actually much larger than that because almost any other field that we're looking at right now is going to be impacted by synthetic biology. You think about food, you think about agriculture, you think about chemical, you think about biotech, all of that is not going to be the same in a few years from now. And this creates some of the largest opportunities that the world has ever seen on business side. Now, why can I stand and talk about that without being an expert in the field or just studying it in the last few years? The reason is that it's no longer about biology anymore. It used to be just about biology. So when we looked at these companies, they used to be about experts. But this has now changed. Why has it changed? Because of a few fundamental tech changes. The first thing is the cost of sequencing genes. I'm sure many of you are aware of this, but if you followed Moore's law, which basically is how we look at almost any computational power, then the cost of sequencing a genome today should have been still around $750,000. As many of you may know, this is now around $300. And so we're basically moving much faster than Moore's law. The outcome of this is that getting data that was never available for us in the past has become today very easy and very mundane. But it's not just about the ability to sequence, because what happened is that with the ability to sequence, what we're basically getting into, we're getting into a dramatically larger data set. And so now that we can sequence everything, not only are we sequencing more, but we can also sequence again and again and again as we're changing stuff. We can also get data in real time. And the outcome is that the databases that we've had only 10 years ago are a fraction, one in a million of the amount of data that we're gathering now every year. The outcome of this is that not just do we have what to do with the data, which we'll talk about in a second, but also that many organizations that never before thought about data the way we used to think about it in software are starting to understand that their future lies in data. And so you look at all the hospitals in the world, they're all starting to collect data. You look at HMOs, they're starting to collect data. And so suddenly, not only do we have the sequencing data, but it's also tied into medical records. And so suddenly we have not just a lot of genome data, we also have a lot of medical records and a lot of personal data of people. And all of that is just lying around for us to pick up. And now that we have all the data, we have to think about the next thing. What do we do with this data? And again, 10 years ago, we could do nothing with this data even if we had it. We couldn't do anything because the stage of machine learning was just not there. And so even the organizations that had the data just couldn't really make a lot out of it. And suddenly today, not only do we have the data, but also the leaps in machine learning and in deep learning get us to the point that we can suddenly make sense of this data. So a lot of data that we can now suddenly make sense of, but that's not enough. And what we had over the last few years is, for the first time ever, we're able to also act upon the outcomes of these data. So for many years, we've been looking at things and saying, maybe through that we can develop a drug. But now we can actually re-engineer the genetics themselves. Using CRISPR, using other technologies, today we can actually take the outcome of the analysis and re-engineer the actual biological systems that we're reviewing. This is now something that's happening in labs every day. Some of you surely know about that more than I do. But this ability to gather data, to analyze it, and to act upon it is a whole new ballgame when it comes to biology. And this is the age of computational or synthetic biology. And this is what we're looking for, and this is why we're focusing on it. Another thing, by the way, that's happening is not the ability to change it, but also the ability to produce it. One of the companies we invested in is a company called Twist Bioscience. I'm sure some of you heard of it. That company actually prints genes, which means that we can actually now analyze, understand, and then create the genes we need for changing life the way we know it. And so this is what's happening, and this has been talked by many people other than me, and I don't think that you need me to understand that. But we actually think that there's something even bigger than that there's a way to create companies that will not only leverage this new era of data and this new era of computational biology, but will actually be able to create the largest companies the world has ever seen. Why is that? Because in the past, this is the way traditional biological companies worked. So you started by research. Well, you raised some money. You started researching. You discovered something. Once you discovered something, you went into monetizing it. You made some money, and then if somebody didn't buy you on the way and turned you into one company and one product company that's been acquired, you would take some of that money and you would go to invest again in another piece of research to create maybe another product. And that's been the vicious cycle of these companies. And it's been a vicious cycle because it was not based on software, it was not based on data, it was not based on machine learning. And we think that now is the time to start changing that paradigm and create much larger and more meaningful companies. How do we do that? So we talk about something called network effects. And network effects is a phenomena that I'm sure you've all heard of, which comes from a totally different field, right? So when we think about network effect, what we mean is that there's a network, and every node that joins the network gains a lot of value from the existing nodes, and then the existing nodes are getting more value as more nodes join the network. Examples, Facebook, probably heard about this company. That is a network. Every user that comes in joins and enjoys all the other people that are in the network. WhatsApp is another one of those. Marketplaces like eBay and like Uber are also network effects phenomena. And basically, when we think about what creates the defensibility of a company, and the value of companies, by the way, starts with their initial discovery or their initial product, but only becomes huge and exponentially higher when you hit the network effect, when you get defensibility. And so when we look at defensibilities in the world, there are basically only 5 of them. One of them, which we all know from the world of biology, is IP, right? We own the IP, we own the patent, we can make money out of it. That's easy, that's simple. By the way, in software, that's almost non-existent anymore, but in biology, it still exists. But that creates that one product company that we spoke about. The next thing is scale, right? When you're huge, when you have many products and you have the, you have the supply chain and you have the distribution channels, that's great. So because of scale, you can become larger and larger. Biggest example in the world today, of course, is Amazon, but all the large drug companies are the same. Very difficult for a startup to say, I'm going to start by having scale, right? Embedding is another one. Embedding is when you basically get yourself into a system in a way that you can't be taken out. So an exclusive agreement with an HMO is embedding, because they can only, now the customers can only get your drug. But again, very difficult for a startup to get that, almost impossible. And then the last one is brand, Coca-Cola, Apple, any other brand that you want. And again, that exists a little bit less in in bio, but even when it does, it's almost impossible for a company, for a young company to have, right? You can't wake up in the morning and say, I want to be as big as Amazon, or I want to be as embedded as Microsoft, or I want to have the biggest brand as Apple. That just doesn't work, right? So what do? You can actually go for something else, and that something is called network effects, as I said before. And when you get network effects, they're the best defensibility you can get. Because first of all, they're the only one that's really available for you as a startup. The second thing is that it's really inherent to the digital world, and is the foundation for other defensibilities. And we've spent the last 10 years investing and investigating network effects and trying to understand how we can harness this knowledge into every field that we touch on. And what we got to is this map. And this is a map of 13 types of network effects, right? And it's difficult to see here, but it's this one is called the physical network effect, and then there is the protocol network effect, and the personal utility, and personal, and so on and so on and so on. And these network effects are the way we look at companies and the way we analyze how defensible a company is. And many people thought that this is only applicable for software, only applicable for tech. But the reality is that that's very applicable also for biology. So how do we look at that? What are the inherent network effects that you can get in the biology space, in computational biology? So the first one is one that is called the data network effect. And the data network effect is a network effect that comes when every user that uses the system contributes data to the system. And so it's better for the other users. You know it probably best from a little company, small company called Google, right? Every time that we search in Google, our search and what we click on impacts the results for everybody else. And without that, Google would not have been as good as it is. Now, this is a very inherent defensibility, very inherent network effect for machine learning companies, for AI companies as we call them. The reason is that by design, every interaction you have with the data makes your system better. It's a learning system. This is usually a relatively weak network effect. It can give you defensibility for a few years, but not a lot more than that. But it is very easy to understand how it applies to biology systems. So the first thing it does, it improves your core product because everybody that uses it just makes it better. It lowers your cost because you don't need to do the computations from scratch every time. Every time somebody uses it, the computations basically make the system better. And it speeds your time to market. Now, in biology, the question on this becomes, what kind of data are you getting? And so the easiest data is what's called the internal data. The internal data is the data that we create every time we run the system. It's our internal computation, so our system becomes better. That's easy. And that's the least defensible, because that's the closest to the way we used to work in the past. Then there's external data. External data is that every time that somebody externally uses your system, we get something in it. I'll give you an example in a second. So external data, especially if it comes from consumers or if it comes from many parties, that creates a lot more defensibility. And then the last thing that creates a lot of defensibility is the pace in which the data is updated. So a data network effect that is only happening once, meaning every node uses the system once, and that's it. You know, they use the data, and that's it. They contributed it. That's weak. But if we're looking, for example, at data that comes in real time, all the time, like if you think about a flu epidemic and you think about getting data in real time, how it mutates across the country and where it reaches and so on, this real-time data is a lot more defensible than one-off slow data. So that's the data network effect, and I'll show you in a second how it works in one company. But the really most interesting one is something, a concept that we've basically found a few years ago, which is called the bioplatforms. And we've now invested in a bunch of those, and we believe that this is truly the future of synthetic biology companies. And the bioplatforms are basically platforms just like any other software platform. At the core of them, you need to have the bio IP, simply because biology is different than software. You don't just need the software, but the bio IP, we'll talk about that in a second. And then on top of it, you build methodology, automation, data storage, and compute. And what you do with this platform, and this is where the mental shift happens, is that yes, you go and you do develop your first product on your own. So product number one is just the way it used to be always before. I have my own IP and I develop my own product. Product number two may also be the same. But you're building it from scratch to be a platform, which means that at the same time that you're developing your own products, you're starting to invite other people or other companies to come only with their core IP, and you're telling them, hey guys, we have the entire platform ready for running many more things on it. Why don't you come with your core research and start running it on our platform? And so as it becomes a product, we get a piece of that revenue, but more than that, we get a piece of that knowledge. And so these bio platforms, you know, they seem like just like a business model, but they're a lot more than just a business model, because not only do we then end up bringing many partners that instead of us being able to create only 2 products, they can create hundreds or thousands of products, but every product that's developed on the platform actually makes the platform much stronger. So these are 4 of the companies we invested in synthetic biology, and I'm going to talk about one of them. One of them is called Genome Compiler. That's a company that basically is the CAD software for designing genes, because as you start being able to change genes, you need to be able to design it. That was actually acquired by a company we invested in called Twist Bioscience, which I mentioned before, which is printing genes. TechBio is the foundry of the craziest ideas in synthetic biology out of Silicon Valley in Israel. And the one I want to talk about today is one of the companies we're the proudest ever, which is called Mammoth, that you might have heard of. What does Mammoth do? So Mammoth basically is creating a bioplatform for diagnostics. Mammoth are 2 founders from Stanford and 2 founders from Berkeley, together with Jennifer Doudna, one of the co-discoverers of CRISPR, that basically have found a way to use CRISPR to create the cheapest, fastest, and most accurate diagnostics in the world. How does that work? You're basically taking CRISPR, but not Cas9, that, again, sorry for those that don't understand that, but you're taking not Cas9, you're taking Cas12 and 13, which are shredding genes, and they've found a way to basically not just program it to identify specific mutations, but also to change the color on paper when it happens. The meaning is that you can create real-time diagnostics. They take only a few minutes and cost less than $1 per test. The impact, of course, is staggering. You can do any type of test anywhere in the world without any lab equipment. And they're now starting to produce it. But the way we built it is we built it to be a bioplatform. So this is how we looked at this business. We took our map and we said, what can we actually build for Mammoth? And so at the beginning we said, this is going to be a two-sided, tough to say, a two-sided platform, where two-sided platform means that somebody's creating the platform and others are coming and building on top of it, like a Microsoft operating system, right? So that's the first thing we did. The second thing we did, but to make it work, we've got to create IP. So we went to Berkeley and we got all the IP from Jennifer's lab on CRISPR 12 and 13, on Cas12 and 13, to enable us to actually do that. So now we locked in the IP. The third thing we said, okay, that's great, but we also need the data network effect. So the way we compile the system and the machine learning basis we built into it takes every experiment that's done by anybody on that platform and refactors it without undermining the core IP of every partner, but it refactors it into the core AI layer so that the next partner is going to have a better system, the next partner is going to have a better system. Also, the agreements, and there's a lot of thinking here about the legal, the agreements are such that all the learnings that come from the system outside of the core IP actually are part of the platform. So we created the data network effect. But we said that's not enough, because we also wanted to add on top of it the real-time data network effect. And so while the end product is going to be a product that is a piece of paper, very cheap, changing the world of diagnostics, in the meantime, we've also created readers, and these readers in the field allow us to gather data in real time from anywhere in the world where Mammoth diagnostics is happening. So now it's external data, not just the internal data, and it's not just one-offs, it's in real time to strengthen our position. And then by adding many of the partners and adding a lot of IP, we're locking down the scale, which makes us the leading company in this field. So this is how we think about creating these companies. And we think that there's a lot of thinking that needs to be put today into the creation of these companies, because you can end up being, this could have ended up being a single company, a single product company. The funny story, which they don't really tell these days, is that their first product that they wanted to, when they came to us for fundraising, the product they wanted to create was a single product that was very simply a test to find out whether fish in the fish market already had bacteria or not. They wanted to create one product, and they had a way of thinking about it. And we together thought about how we create a platform out of it. And this is now one of the hottest companies in the field. And we're trying to take any company that we're building and move it to this. And so this is their bio platform, as I said, two-sided platform with a data network effect, with many partners, with the core legal bit and tech bit built so that every partner that joins is going to make it better for everybody else. This is one of my favorite quotes from Jennifer, and she's basically talking about the fact that right now it's the first time in history that we can not only observe biology, but we can actually change it. And this opens a whole new world in almost every possible field. And this is one of the biggest opportunities. And for those of you that are founders or want to be founders, my summary for you is think computational biology. When you do, think network effects so that you can create companies that are larger and better and go and change our world, because we're living in the most exciting time to actually do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gigi. So I'm going to invite Oliver and James to join us for the panel. And we've got a really great range of people with us. So I'll let everyone introduce themselves. I'll start by giving you a little bit more background on me. So right now I'm an investor. I'm a partner at a seed stage fund in the UK called Episode 1. And we focus on deep tech investments that are based here. Before that, I actually started a business very much in this space. So it was quite early in the space back in 2012. Started a business called Helix Nano in the US. And it was really this insight that we had that the iteration cycle of being able to design, build, and test when working with genetic material had been dramatically shortened by all of these new technologies. And we started out applying that as a tool and as a toolkit for the industry before we realized that actually we needed to become a product company. So we pivoted towards developing our own cancer therapies using that machine learning driven iteration cycle. But I will tell you more about that later. I'll hand over now to James and Oliver to introduce themselves.
Thanks very much. I'm James. I'm a scientist turned entrepreneur and the founder of a company called Lab Genius. We're based here in London, deep tech company interested in autonomizing the scientific discovery process for the creation of new high-value proteins to treat a whole array of diseases.
Hi, I'm Oliver Morton. I'm a writer and editor. At the moment, I'm an editor at The Economist, where I wrote a big piece about synthetic biology a few months ago. In my own writing, I tend to write about planets, and you might think that's not very biological, and that's true for almost all planets except this one, which is profoundly biological, which is why it's the best planet. And so...
For now.
Sorry?
For now.
For now and for some time, I think. But the point here, so my first book about the Earth was a book about photosynthesis, which really brought home to me the sense of how that which happens at a molecular scale and that which happens at a planetary scale and that which happens at a social human scale are profoundly linked. And that's where I tend to take my work these days.
Wow, brilliant. Lots of questions on that. And we've heard from you. So I might just kick us off with my favorite thing on panels is when people disagree with each other. I have to say I get desperately bored of everyone agreeing. So to encourage a little of healthy disagreement, I'd like to start by asking each of you about a contrarian view that you hold about this space, a contrarian view about where you think this field is going, the future of life, the future of biology. And I gave you a little chance to prepare, so I'm going to let you go first.
Yeah, I've had about 25 seconds to prepare. Well, yeah, thinking of a contrarian view that I hope everyone won't agree on is, I guess, maybe let's root this around linguistic bias. When we're kind of thinking about stuff, words like manufacturing, building things with our hand. What about engineering? When I think of engineering, I think about watching my daughter kind of build blocks, towers, and when you look at how the species has tried to engineer life, it's in effectively the same way. We've tried to reduce the complexity of biology down to something simple that we can understand, genes, and then see how we can genetically engineer, how we can recombine these standardized components into new complex living systems that do interesting things. well, what happens if you can't actually engineer biology in this way? What happens if the complexity of biology is just like fundamentally too complex for the human brain to actually grasp, comprehend, and manipulate? Well, that's my thesis. My thesis is that engineering biology in a way in which you seek to understand it is fundamentally flawed. And actually, if we're to successfully build new biological products and systems, we have to actually think about it as a fundamentally different thing. Think about it as a search problem. And if we think about it as a search problem, then the next question is, are we actually capable of doing the search? And the answer to that is probably no. And so I think the future of engineering biology, and this is something that my whole team are engaged on, is how do we build an engine, a robot scientist that's able to search through this high-dimensional space of potential biological solutions to create new biological systems? And I think that's the future of engineering biology.
Brilliant. Love it.
I'd like to go with three. But the first, which is very, very minor. I can see that Mammoth has a great future in front of it, and I'm very excited about it. But I was slightly disappointed to hear that it doesn't make mammoths. I think you should do what you say on the tin.
We can diagnose mammoth.
Diagnosing mammoth. I can diagnose a mammoth. Big
them.
hairy thing with tusks, almost certainly a mammoth. But more seriously, two things. I understand what Gigi means when he says it's no longer about biology, but slightly thinking of what James was just saying, it kind of is still about biology in that the little things, you can take out a huge amount of data, but when you think about the possibility spaces those little guys live in, there's always a lot more. And my suspicion is, one person I know whose company sort of sells, I can't really say very much about it, but who's working with a lot of non-typical bacteria, is that there's a sort of way that if you ask synthetic biology for a cow, it will say, I've got a really good dog, and I've got a cardboard picture of an udder, and that's it, because dogs are what I know, and that's what I'm going to do. And to some extent, among other things, biology is always working certainly kind of against you, or certainly with its own agenda while it's doing stuff. And so unless you can set up your product or your idea, your platform, so that the living things you're depending on and your interests are very well aligned, you're going to have to be sort of like really heavily fascist about trying to keep that thing in line, and it's got billions of people who can try and overthrow you. So it's no longer about biology. It's true in some ways, but biology is going to have a big say for a long time to come. And the third thing was really taking issue more with Jennifer Doudna. And of course I understand, and I'm fascinated by the way that being able to do the things that people do in synthetic biology is something fundamentally new. And at the same time, it isn't. I mean, 10,000 years ago, this was not a planet full of cows and chickens. It is now a planet full of cows and chickens and significantly fewer fish. And that's a very profound change that the first great human interaction with the natural world, or intervention into the natural world, really brought about. Similarly, 500 years ago, things that had been evolving in the Americas and in Eurasia and Africa got to meet each other through the Columbian Exchange in a way they never had before, and that changed the way people live all across the world. I mean, there are spice merchants in India who will tell you that chili is indigenous to India. They have no idea that chili comes from somewhere else because it seems so fundamentally part of their life. Similarly, the same exchange also led, as we now know, to a terrible genocide, biologically mediated genocide in the Americas. So we humans have made huge interventions in the way life and the world interact before. I think this is another intervention similarly on that scale, but I think it's useful to look back to those previous interventions and to learn both a little bit of foresight, humility, but also ambition from them.
Very well said. Just to pick up on your second point, I definitely learned through the course of building what first started out as, very simply, we're just going to apply mathematical methods to biology, and gradually we lost the battle with the sort of many, many million-year-old beast that is evolved biology, and you realize that there's all of this baroque machinery there that you still have no real way of fully understanding, and so wrestling with that creature is much, much harder than it sounds. And completely agree, it's nothing like working with Lego, actually.
One thing I'd like to ask Gigi and James
could I challenge that for a second?
Please.
So I think that I was about to say something like this, but clearly what you guys said sparked it even more. I actually sort of completely disagree.
Yay, great, disagreement on a panel.
And I'll say more than that. I think that my biggest, kind of horrible insight is that the people that are going to win in the battle to create this new era of biology are not going to be biologists. And the reason is because biologists think that it's all about biology. Now, I'm not suggesting for a second that it's Lego blocks and it's very simple to understand. I am suggesting, however, that the thinking that led biological discoveries over the last century or a few centuries, which was a very slow iterative process that was led by the pace of biology, is no longer relevant. And that where we are today, with all the, with all the ethical concerns and with everything that comes with that, and I'm not undermining this in a second, is a totally different era where the people that understand that we suddenly entered the era of fast iteration in biology are the people that are going to win. When I talk about companies, it's not about winning or losing. And the meaning is that when I meet scientists, many of them still think linearly about the way they research biology. And when I meet data people that went into biology, I see that they're bringing the iterative thinking and the iterative process that made software companies grow so fast. Now, what I can share with you a story of a company that I invested in a few years ago that is doing CRISPR-based agriculture. Okay, and that company has now, over a period of 4 years, generated more different permutations of plants than the world's largest seed companies did over the last 100 years. Why? Because they're not waiting. Because they're constantly editing. Because they're not looking at it as a linear process, but they're looking at it as an iterative, fast software process. Now, it's not that they don't employ agriculture experts. They do. But these are the people that eventually do the labor, while it's the data people that do the, again, not calling it smarter, no, but they're doing the iterative, fast process. And my prediction is that we will see a new type of researcher in biology. And this type is either going to be biologists that would understand fast software iteration, or there would be software engineers that would learn biology, not as much as I did, but a lot more clearly. And these are going to be the people that are going to lead the next revolution.
If I could give you an example of that, so I hate to end up agreeing again, but
no, come on.
So in my business, we found that actually it was in having one co-founder who came from a physics background, was a mathematician, was a data guy, one co-founder who was a biologist from the Church lab, albeit, which is a very progressive biology lab, but it was the combination of those two people working together, respecting each other's discipline, and being able to talk across disciplines enough that you could design, indeed, a system as a company where the data was informing the experiments were informing the data, and so it was this very hand-in-hand process.
The reason I'm laughing is because it's just a cultural difference. You're British, I assume.
Yeah.
And so the way you describe it is that respecting each other. I'm Israeli, so the way I would describe it is constantly fighting with each other. Yeah. But it's the same outcome at the end.
Absolutely.
I would go one step further, and I wouldn't reduce it to this kind of new breed of scientists that kind of sits at that interface of computational science and biology. I think those people are the people who build the platforms, but I think it's the platforms themselves that will do the science. And the nuance there is that you need this whole array of different domain experts, people expert in automation, systems biology, synthetic biology, to build those fundamental platforms. But those are the things that do the science, and the way that they do the science is in this fundamentally different way, this non-linear way that you're describing. Okay. I think that's an interesting piece there.
At the risk of adding to agreement, I think my point wasn't that I'm quite happy to buy that it's no longer about biologists. I think the biology may still have something to say on the matter, but I quite agree that the way that this is a fundamentally new way of doing biology that people are working out at all sorts of companies that you fund and James's company, My point was that I wasn't going to go the whole Ian Malcolm and life will find a way, but I was going to say that, you know, lots of people, for instance, have found all sorts of clever ways to make algae produce more sugar. And every time after about 10 to 100 generations, the algae say, oh, sod this, we don't like doing this. And so certainly for things that have to live outside the lab, and I think we might want to talk about this, but I think a lot of synthetic biology is going to be, you know, not producing single molecules, but doing stuff in the world. The way that life interacts with its environment is still going to be, it's still going to throw you some surprises. But the idea that biologists are the people to navigate you through those surprises is, I agree, not tenable.
Yeah, by the way, one of the things I'm doing is I'm trying to get as much of biologists into the mix. One of the reasons is that, sadly, as we know, there is still a relatively low percentage of women on the data physics side, sadly, and there's a much higher percentage on the biology side. And so I think it's a goal for all of us to make sure that biologists are an important part of this new era.
Yeah.
Because I think that is a totally different discussion, but I think that is a big stepping stone that we could use for diversity.
So to pick up on a point that you actually just made, what do we think of the areas where, I suppose in these sorts of conferences we tend to err on the side of optimism and excitement and how quickly everything's moving. So again, to be a little bit different, what do we think of the areas where it's just going to be really, really hard, it's going to take a really long time, where software and AI and all of these things are not going to win in the near future? The last bits to change, what do you think will be the most difficult?
In terms of the discovery itself, or?
The future of life. It's a big theme.
Yeah.
Well, something that we were talking about, clinical trials
Yeah.
is an obvious place where it's going to take a very long time. The one where I'm worried about this, because by and large, I assume that things that happen after I die are going to be more interesting than things that happen before I die, just on sort of like the law of averages. So the only one thing that I want to see happen quickly, and I'm worried about not happening quickly enough, is using synthetic biology to eat up the petrochemical industry. We've really got to get rid of the petrochemical industry within the next 20 or 30 years. It produces a huge number of things other than stuff we burn that's really, good, useful stuff. And we need to know how to make all those hydrocarbons using nice living things that want to do so. And they won't all live. I mean, some of them will live outside in ponds. I don't know where they're all going to live. I don't know what they're all going to do. But if we don't get the petrochemical industry basically eaten out from the inside by synthetic biology, well, huge trouble. And that's sort of like it's within the sort of like few decades I feel I have left to me.
Yeah.
I think the challenge here is that all of these products we're talking about, they're not like apps that you build on a weekend and stick on the internet. They cost many, many, many millions to create, and they take many, many years to build. And that fundamentally means that there are only a few kind of commercial attractor basins where this stuff is going to be targeted at, and it's fundamentally down to people like Gigi who have the deep pockets to do that. So what are those areas? You've seen the load up on there. I think in the short term, therapeutics will continue to be a massive pull just because the market knows how to finance that. And we'll see the emergence of other areas, but it's going to take trailblazing companies to do that.
Yeah.
I think that most of the people that are coming to these sessions want to know whether they're going to live forever or not. When I started investing in bio, I sat with a friend and we did a portfolio analysis, and I suddenly brought up a bio company and said, "Let me guess, you just turned 40." Because that's what happens. Suddenly you don't care.
That was our experience fundraising. It was like, right, this is an older guy. He's going to care about the future of life. I'm going to talk about longevity.
When you're 30, who cares? And I think that when I look at all the companies I see, actually, for example, when you spoke about clinical trials, I see a huge change in clinical trials because what I saw already in the last couple of years, a few companies that are bringing totally new machine learning-based models of the human body, and it's starting from animal body, which is actually even simpler, which means that we can actually save a lot of time and run theoretical experiments much faster, and that's already in place. So I think that that's going to change dramatically. The one thing where I think we're like light years behind and people don't get it is in our biological understanding of the brain. And so it's very possible that we can make our body live a lot longer. It's very possible that we can, get our hearts to regenerate a bit more, or get our blood to be better, but we're nowhere near to even starting to understand how we're going to make our brain younger, or how we're going to make it work for many more years. So even if we get the body to work for 140 years, I don't think anybody really has any of the initial knowledge to start making our brain work for 140 years. And so that's kind of the sad story for me, because I still hope that I can live a bit longer, but not on the brain side.
I think that's maybe a sad story, but I actually find what the two of you have just said really depressing. Because we don't, people, I mean, the biggest problem with healthcare in the world is that it's very poorly distributed, and that in some countries it's extraordinarily poorly administered. It's not that that's not a huge thing. The problem with, I don't know how old you are. I mean, I know you're over 40, and I know you want to live to 140. So that sounds like you kind of want to see, the year 2100. I think there is far more we can do with synthetic biology to make the year 2100 better than to make you better at whatever age you are at 2100. And the fact that this all gets sucked into narcissistic prolongation of human life is just a disturbing thing. I mean, you have here a technology that can... You have here technology that can change the world, and what you want to do is make people who, not you personally, but what the system that we're a part of wants to do is make treatments for $2 million that will help a person with cancer. I have every sympathy with that, but that's not the really big challenge that we're facing over the next 80 years on this planet.
But maybe to be realistic,
but if you don't end up tapping the funding sources, then you're going to get to nothing.
You use it as a Trojan horse.
Right, and
where can you get the capital from that moves the science forward, that helps the technology get to the point where you can use it?
I think it is actually reflective of fundamental human nature as well, in the sense that, like, why are people on Tinder? You know why people are on Tinder. Why are people investing money in drug development? Because we all have the urge to...
Why do people plant trees?
But this is the piece, isn't it? It's
they
like,
plant trees because they know they won't be around, but they like trees.
Correct. So how do we as a society change the decision-making process to go beyond the kind of baked-in, deep Darwinian urges to something that is more beneficial to us as a whole? And I think that's the root of the...
I absolutely disagree that there's a baked-in, deep Darwinian urge towards profit.
No, towards survival. And profit is the second order effect.
But survival is also second. I mean, you can't know what makes you survive. I mean, it's clear that given the analysis, it appears that at the moment we're not moving towards survival terribly well.
Not as a species level, but on the individualistic level. That's
absolutely.
where the decision-making process is being driven, right?
Yeah, and it's that disconnect. So, James, on this topic, tell us a bit about your experience with fundraising. I know from my own experience that it's a difficult space. You end up sort of falling between stools of, in a sense, the West Coast software investors, the East Coast biology and biotech investors, and then on top of that...
And then the British investors.
Exactly. On top of that, you raised in the UK. So tell us about your experiences there.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The first thing I'll say is building a company is just fundamentally very difficult. That's like the first piece. It's not actually just about... when I started out, I was like, I'm a scientist. I can solve the technology problem. Done. Turns out it's like not that easy. The fundamental premise of what we're working on is that understanding biology is just too complex for the brain. So you need to build a system that can fully autonomize that. But you yourself can't even build the system because you don't understand software engineering, automation, synthetic biology, data engineering. So you actually have to build a multidisciplinary group of scientists who can build the system to understand the complexity. And then you have to be able to raise like many, many millions to be able to do that. And then that means that the system has to be able to produce products that people are going to buy. And you have to be able to do that within a time frame of 18 to 24-month financing window. So that's like pretty challenging. And the good news is that London, especially within the UK, is an amazing place to get seed investment if you want to build a company like this. And we've been really lucky to work with amazing seed stage investors in London, like Backed, like Kindred, people who will make a big bets on this space. Now, what's the next challenge after that is how do you tap into the deep pockets? So you say you've raised 6 million or whatever. Now you want to like level up and you want to grow, double the size of your company. How do you get the Series A funding? Well, it turns out there's a lot of Series A funding around, but there are actually very, very few investors who have the depth of experience in this space that will actually make a difference. And why is that important? If you get the wrong group of investors, they'll just push you completely in the wrong direction. They'll optimize for short-term profits or whatever. You need people who will back you investing in these deep technology platforms. It takes many years, and the nuances of navigating the markets is complex. Now, the challenge for us is a lot of that really deep expertise exists overseas. So you've got to find a way to get those West Coast investors who have the deep experience in the space to pipe capital here into London. The good news is possible, which is closing out around now, which will be announced in the next, say, month or so, but it's really tough. But I think the thing that's changing is that there is more and more confidence from overseas investors to pipe the capital into places like London, and then we're building this ecosystem, this community here, and I see that really reinforcing the whole system.
Yeah, I mean, Gigi, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. From my perspective, trying to raise money here in 2012 for an idea that's in this space was nigh on impossible, but there were very edgy people in the US like, Sam Altman, Eric Schmidt, who understood that this was a very exciting space, and now I feel like there's a much bigger trend towards that in Silicon Valley, and I think it's starting to happen here. So there's a big accelerator in the UK called EF, and I noticed that suddenly a much larger proportion of their businesses are in the computational bio space. I have to say, as someone who's founded a business in that space and is now an investor, I do get a little bit nervous about, software investors kind of going on vacation doing biology for a bit and getting burned, and then the pendulum swinging violently back in the other direction when they realize just how hard and complicated it is. But I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think you've got a good point, and the reality is that on the other side, being an investor that looks into this field is probably the toughest field to look at ever, because it is, as we said, a combination of two fields, right? So you need to understand whether the core science is there. You need to understand whether the core data understanding or the ability to build something which is computational is there. You need to look at the team and say, do they have both capabilities? And then you need to start doing all the rest of the normal checks, like what's the size of the market and what's the competition and so on. So it's really a lot more complicated. And there's very little investors out there that took the time to be experts in both worlds, which is why it's become difficult. Now, what happened in the last few years is that this became a very popular field. So now every investor has got to have one of those. So everybody needs to have a company that has in its deck biology, synthetic, and AI. If you don't have that, then you can't really have a website today in Silicon Valley. And so everybody now needs a pet project like this. So we've seen a lot more early investments. Having said that, the thing that bothers people the most is that the cycles are much longer. And so even if you have a pet project, and even if you're used to your pet project being able to raise money after 18 months at a 3x the valuation or more, this is just not going to happen here. Because in 18 months, it's going to be very you're going to be very lucky if there's any signs that this is in the right direction, simply because it takes much longer, although it's much faster than the way biology used to be. And so what we're seeing is that it used to be all desert. Then we started seeing seed, because angels are easier to put money in, seed funds are easier to put small bets, but A's were dead. Now we're starting to see A's, but still the drop-off right now from seed to A is still higher than it is in other fields, and the drop-off between A's to B's is dramatically higher.
And I think the C round is where we'll see this huge drop-off, right? Because you have, with these companies where it takes a long time to grow, you have a lot of the valuation just being fundamentally pegged to the promise, and it's at the C round where it's like, show me how you justify this valuation, right?
Show me where you're going to make
money.
And
so this is the piece now where when you're building these companies, and certainly at Lab Genius where we think about it is, how do we build a commercial strategy now that means when we get to the C, we'll have that pipeline?
What we see is we see many companies that are sadly taking the wrong route, which is the route that says, we have a big dream, but we're going to neglect that big dream for a period of time because we now have 12 months to bring signs of gold. And these signs of gold can't be on our big dream because that's going to take 5 years. So we're going to start digging somewhere else and bring something smaller maybe, or something less significant, because we've got to think about our funding.
I think that's where having the smart investors actually pays.
Yeah, and we are, what we're trying to do, we're trying to create that ecosystem where we have both the biological expertise and the software and data expertise to be able to find these companies and fund them in a way that will give them the runway they need.
I suspect that part of the answer there will be figuring out how to engage cleverly with the West Coast, with industry and with investors more from the traditional biotech sphere. But
they're moving over here, right? They're actively moving over because it's so competitive out there. The deal arbitrage are coming over here.
Sorry, I didn't mean West Coast, I meant East Coast. So going to, traditional farmer land and seeing how you
that's
can...
tough,
but that's all moving.
With challenges as well.
Yeah, but that's all moving to the West Coast. The place for synthetic biology that's thriving is not in the East Coast.
Right.
Yeah, they have been slow on that, and so Went to the West Coast.
So time has flown. I'm going to ask one final question to wrap up. Could each of you tell me about a business that you really admire in this space, that you either wish you had started yourselves or you wish you'd invested in? And tell us a bit about why you think it's such an exciting company, what it is you admire about their approach.
I'm going to cheat and say two companies. For us at LabGenius, it's probably Zymergen and Recursion that we really admire. They're two huge companies, each have raised well in excess of 100 million, and they're building these deep technology stacks to autonomize various aspects of the scientific discovery processes in their fields. And although they're in sort of slightly disparate areas, they give us a language and a reference point to communicate to the world what we're doing and how this is all part of like this broader change that's happening. And
so you appreciate them beating a path?
They're trailblazing this path in this area.
They're building platforms.
But they're also correct. Yeah, both platform companies, and they're both incredibly generous in terms of how they give back to the community and nurture the next wave of entrepreneurs as well.
Brilliant. Thanks.
Actually, I was also going to say Zymergen. Partly because also, the things that they've designed are already producing large amounts of stuff, by the tens of thousands of tons. And that's a real thing, and they're not. And I think that looking at material applications as much or as well as biomedical applications, you're less likely to get burnt because there will, just as Gigi describes, there's going to be another crunch in this. And just the very fact that what you say, that everyone needs this in their deck, means that at the moment there are going to be a lot of not terribly good ideas going on. Whereas Zymergen, and there are a few other companies you could mention, but actually going in and saying, first of all, we're going to actually build this platform and use it for people, and then we're going to use it for ourselves. I think that's a really interesting play.
Yeah.
Yeah, so James actually stole both of my companies.
There are basically two companies.
No, there are two companies that are building it exactly the way we think it should be built, and they're taking the most advantage out of it. But the one I want to bring to your attention, which is a company that not all of you know, I mentioned it briefly, is a company called Twist Bioscience. They are another platform company. What they're doing...
Oh, but you're cheating because you invested in them. It has to be one you haven't invested.
But I invested so late that it doesn't really count.
It doesn't count.
Didn't make enough out of it. I couldn't say that it's mine. Not mine, it's mine. It's never mine, but it's like that. And what they're doing, they hacked printing genes. And this is such a huge discovery because what they're basically allowing pharma companies is to, rather than, trying to develop a drug is essentially like taking a dart and throwing it from miles away and hoping that you're going to hit it. And with what they're doing, you can basically start generating millions of different molecules and try them one after the other. So it's a combinatorial approach to science, which I love, and that's going to change a lot of the pharma company industry the way we know it. And so I love what they do.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, guys. And I'm going to hand back to Azim.
Before we clap them and thank them, I just have a couple of things to say. So number one, this is the cutting edge stage. It's the second year we did it. Last year, we actually had the CEO of Zymergen speak and the director of data science at Recursion speak. So we really are ahead of the curve. You can catch the future by watching last year's presentations on YouTube, and if you missed this one, I know none of you did, you can watch next year's work by looking at this year's. We are that far ahead. Talking of which, tomorrow morning, last sessions, we are going to kick off with a brilliant discussion on the state of cyber threats. You might want to sort of pay attention to that one, and then the second session, I think, is going to be one of the most exciting areas of development over the coming 5 to 10 years, which is the intersection of complexity theory, new models of economics, and artificial intelligence. And we have 3 of the world's leading researchers who have come in from various parts of the world to have that discussion. And then we are going to close off with the absolutely brilliant Thomas Reardon from Control Labs. Reardon developed software that's used by more than 1 billion people and is now working on neural interfaces. In other words, how can you start to control machines just through various types of signals. So please make time for tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of the day and say thank you to our fantastic panel.
Thank you.